Okay, hold on. I know this game isn't strictly speaking a retro game, but, well, for one, I want to talk about a good game every once in a while, but more importantly, this whole game exists as a celebration of gaming history, and with that, for a huge part, also retro gaming. So, if you needed a reason for me to cover this game, there you go. If you didn't need a reason and are just waiting for me to start the video, I'll be happy to. This video is going to be slightly different from how I usually do things. Usually I just ramble on about the gameplay, moving on from one topic into the next, jumping around through the game in whichever way I feel like. This game isn't really fit for that. It's a very linear game because of one of its main mechanics, that is, unlocking parts of the gameplay and design elements. So talking about something late game, then jumping back to early game, go ahead to the mid game, only to go back to the very start of the game, would just end up being a huge mess. Instead, I'll give you a brief overview of what the game is like, and I'll take you step by step through it, looking how the progression works. Evoland at its core is a love letter to classic games like The Legend of Zelda and Final Fantasy. It changed up gameplay style to cover other kinds of game genres too. None of these gameplay styles are particularly deep, but for now, let's just remember that inside dungeons, you're playing a toned-down Zelda, and in the overworld, you're playing a toned-down Final Fantasy. When the game starts, you can literally only do one thing. That's walking to the right. Not even walking to the left. No. Just walking to the right. Once you get the chest that opens at the end of that path, you also unlock the ability to go to the left. When I said you need to unlock every little gameplay and design element, I wasn't kidding. You then walk to the chest on the left, unlocking the ability to walk up and down. And here things start to look like an actual video game. You can now move in 2 dimensions, and soon we run into another chest that unlocks screen scrolling for us, and we're on our way. But since the game is so silent so far, how about we open up this chest, which unlocks sound effects for us? Much better. Now we can hear simple things like walking and the opening of chests, but still, this can hardly even be called a video game so far. Where is the challenge? Well, before we unlock that, we see a chest that's not right on our path. This unlocks smooth scrolling, meaning that the screen now stays centered around us instead of having to walk from screen to screen. This is where things get interesting, because throughout the game you can certainly see some chests that you don't actually need to open. But what would happen with the rest of the game if you skipped those? Could you play the whole game without smooth scrolling? Or would you just be given it after some time anyway? Or could I just not move on without it? The game will start to get very glitchy very quickly. The game expects you to pick up any chest that you can see, because that's kind of the whole point of the game, to evolve your gameplay experience bit by bit. Of course, all the chests that you need will be easy to access on your path. If you see a chest that requires some kind of puzzle solving or anything around that, it probably contains something optional, like one of the 30 stars that you can collect, or one of the totally not Final Fantasy IX inspired trading cards. I know that it's based on that. This whole game is one big homage to the Final Fantasy series, among others. You next find your path blocked by some tall grass. You need a sword to get through this, and then you finally unlock monsters. I would argue that this is the moment it becomes a real video game. Now you can do something wrong and die. Having monsters added introduces a failure state, without which I wouldn't really call something a game. You quickly pick up things like music and unlock save points. Personally, I think unlocking save points should have been something much bigger. Being able to save your game was a real revolution in game design, and I feel like that kinda gets lost in this game. I guess it's understandable because you want to be able to put your player in danger, and withholding the option to save makes that much more difficult and much more frustrating to do. But having something like a save code? Oh god, does anybody else remember those? Show up at the end of the first dungeon before going into the world map, and then unlocking saving at an inn, like you used to have to do in the earlier Final Fantasy game. That would make a lot more sense to me. Then in the second dungeon you could add save points, leading to having a pause menu save button towards the end of the game. That could have been fun, but instead you just unlock save points within the first minute of the game. Oh yeah, all of this happening is the first minute of the game. Don't worry, once the basic things have been all set up, we'll speed through more or less the more important upgrades much faster. You next unlock 16-bit graphics with colour and the opening title scroll, explaining the story that nobody really cares about. Don't get me wrong, there is a simple story here, but it's literally like any other Final Fantasy game but shortened down to about an hour and a half in length. The world is slowly dying and you gotta fix everybody's shit. That's about it, really. And before you can even get used to the 16-bit look, you get an upgrade again. Now we're in full 256 color display. It's so lifelike, such modern graphics, such... Okay, let's move on, I'm over it already. Now we make it to the overworld. So far the game has mostly just been a clone of retro Zelda games, and that was because this whole time, which is about 5 minutes, we've been inside of a dungeon. Now that we're in the overworld, we get to see a little bit more of the Final Fantasy influences, like unlocking turn-based combat, because nothing says fun games like getting interrupted every 2 damn seconds by a random battle. This is where you might start to notice some Easter eggs and references as well. Every enemy in the game is based on some kind of recognizable character from gaming, like Chocobos, or later in the game, Piranha Plants and Goombas. Walking across the bridge, you find yourself back inside what looks like a dungeon, but once you beat all the enemies and open a chest, you unlock... a town? Yes, a town. You next have to unlock NPCs, the ability to unlock doors, using the inn to heal, shopping, which interestingly enough sells Phoenix Downs. Not even being subtle with the Final Fantasy reference there, are you? And well, as I said, everything you take granted in gaming, you have to unlock in this game. In a weird way that makes you appreciate the designing process game developers go through a lot more, as well as serving as a fun little history lessons about how games have evolved over the years, because a lot of things that you unlock in this game really were things that straight up just you didn't have in early video games. In the next dungeon, which is a Final Fantasy style dungeon with random encounters, you get a new party member that uses magic. The game never introduces MP mechanics though, or did I just never pick up that chest? Either way, the combat mechanics in this game are really basic and only really serve as a bare bones introduction to the genre, as is evident by something like MP not being there. You can just spam healing spells every turn if you want without really any downside. You do, however, unlock experience points, which allow you to level up and grow stronger. This is probably the least relevant thing ever. You'll finish the game before you reach level 10, and for most major fights, you don't even need to be leveled up at all. It's a purely arbitrary number, and the whole mechanic only exists because of the gimmick of this game, unlocking mechanics. Which is fine, just as somebody who loves RPGs, a little disappointing. Anyway, you beat a boss fight, get the crystal this girl's been looking for, and you turn 3D. That must have been quite a shock for your character. Suddenly you exist in a whole new dimension. All kidding aside though, a new look also means new music. We upgrade to 16-bit music. We get life hearts and suddenly we're playing a very simple real Zelda clone. Just like that we went from Final Fantasy VI to, I don't know, 3D looking Link to the Past? Something like that? Funny thing is, you quickly unlock low-res textures and frankly, the game looks worse with them. I prefer the simple and clean looking style of just having solid colors. I get that it doesn't look very fancy, but for the style of the game we're playing right now, I think it fits very well. Not to worry though, it doesn't take long before we get higher resolution textures, which actually makes the game a little bit less painful to the eye again. Going through the next dungeon, you don't unlock many interesting things. You'll find some walls that you can use bombs on once you get those upgrades a little bit down the line, and a sign blocking you from going to the end of the dungeon has a Bowser face on it, so that's neat. Some other fun things like unlocking the ability to break pots, which really makes the Zelda parallels complete, but other than that, the only thing worth mentioning in here is that your sword gets replaced by Cloud's Buster Sword, sized down to be a one-handed weapon which still looks terribly balanced. That's the thing though, from this point on you don't get very many new unlocks that impact the game outside of the dungeon you're inside of that very moment. And while the game keeps being fun and engaging, you're pretty much just playing the full game now, with all the base functionality as you'd expect any decent game to have being unlocked. But that's only about a third the way through the game, and as I mentioned, you unlock bombs and another graphics upgrade that only is applied within the area you get it in, and so on. Inside this town though, you can also buy a DVD player from a merchant, and it's a pretty expensive boy, and literally the only thing it does is it skips the loading screens, which are artificially placed between maps within this town. And I must admit, I kinda love the idea. Only if modern games really did have shorter loading screens. That would be amazing. Going into one of the last new things inside of this game, we find ourselves in a Diablo-style dungeon, where we have real-time combat with a lot, and I mean a lot, of enemies, giving us more than enough money to buy this DVD player that I just talked about. You also have an inventory with a crap ton of slots, which get filled by random drops from enemies you kill. Since it's such a short dungeon though, I highly doubt that these drops are actually very random. They feel very predetermined to me. I could be mistaken, and maybe there's some degree of randomness to it. To me, however, it really felt like the game was trying to make sure I had a full set of gear by the time I finished the dungeon. And the moment you do, you can actually teleport out. Could that be because there's nothing else for the enemies to drop anymore, or is it just to help out the pacing of the game? And this is where I want to talk about who this game is for really quickly, because obviously this game is made for people who understand video games already. It's a celebration of the medium and a look back over the huge steps forward it's taken over its relatively short history. But at the same time, I also think that this game could function as a sort of baby's first video game, because of the way it builds up its mechanics. Someone who has no idea how to play a video game will literally go through it step by step, learning to walk left and right before being able to walk up and down. The mechanics of this game, while basic, show a number of different genres, helping somebody who might be new to gaming to maybe find what they like best. I would have loved it if there were more different kind of gameplay styles. Since they're all so bare bones, it feels like it's a little small scale to only have Final Fantasy, Zelda and Diablo in here. Add in a platforming segment, maybe a quick race against a bad guy while you're chasing him to his evil lair or something. There are so many opportunities this game could have taken to be a lot more than what it is right now. Don't get me wrong, as it stands, I like this game a lot, but because I like it so much, I would have loved it if it was even more than it currently has to show for itself. I know there is a sequel to the game, and I'm assuming that it's a larger scale game than this one, because this game sold very well, and with a higher budget, I'm expecting a lot more from Evoland 2, but that'll have to be a different video. Back to the game now. Because I lied, this wasn't the last dungeon. Well, it was the last interesting one. We have one more Zelda-style dungeon, which does have a fun mechanic, but much like the rest of the game, it's played out relatively quickly. You see, you can change back and forth between 2D and 3D in this dungeon. Some obstacles might only allow you to pass in 3D because they're big heavy stones and they're also kinda flat. So in 2D they will block you, while in 3D you can just easily step over them. And then in 2D you can walk over small trees because reasons, which block you in 3D. Having to switch back and forth between these two styles to solve puzzles with your newly unlocked bow and arrow is the closest thing this game comes to actually feeling like a real Zelda dungeon. An early game Zelda dungeon though, while this is literally one of the last things you do in this entire game before going to the big evil Tower of Evilness, because if you're inspired by a genre, you also have to embrace its cliches, and I kind of love that. Where your character learns to use the summon Bahamut, which apparently isn't a copyrighted name. But of course, a final boss can't just be a single fight, now can it? We're trying to replicate Final Fantasy here, people! So you chase him to a tree, yeah, a tree, and fight him in an action-style combat with 2 phases, and that's it. Roll credits. For a game that took me under 2 hours to complete, this script ended up being pretty lengthy. I must admit, I have never played Evoland 2, and after making this video, I kinda wanna try to see if this game maybe leans in more towards what I would have loved to see from it. Let me know if you're interested in me covering that game too. It might be a while before I get to doing it, but I certainly do have an interest. And while you're down there typing a comment, don't forget to leave a like on this video to support me, it really does help. And if you're not subscribed yet, you know, it's free, and so is hitting the bell icon.